I think here in the Western world, or at least in the U.S., we often don't think about negotiation maybe as being a really common part of our lives. It. In other countries, maybe I would typically more have associated negotiation with the countries. Maybe you go into a market, and you haggle, and then you see how low they'll go, and then you decide if you're going to buy it or not, or whatever. Um, and of course, it still happens for sure in American life. But my argument is maybe that's happening more than we realize. So, um, of course, there's those who have the viewpoint basically that everything's negotiation, which is which is kind of funny, but it probably does help them um, may get them further in life in some scenarios at least, or get better deals. But when it comes to negotiations, there's some things where it's like buying a used car. That's kind of the classic despised negotiation probably. Um, but of course, salaries to some extent can be a negotiation, and there's probably a lot more things that could be negotiated that we don't, just because we don't really think about doing it. Um, I would say probably though that the negotiation that all of us are in on a more regular basis is a negotiation of relationships, if you will. Now, hopefully not in the sense of we are constantly giving ultimatums on whether or not we continue relationships with people, but um, I do kind of have this theory, which I've stated on the channel before, that relationships essentially are a negotiation, and the terms of the relationship are, we negotiate with each other to figure out what kind of relationship we're going to have. So, for instance, if there's someone with a big ego and they require the people around them, um, kind of give them worship, if you will, or like, are very subservient, or else, or that they won't be on their good people list. That's one way of negotiating. That's the term that person has essentially set forth, is that you will not disagree strongly with me, or you will treat me with you know veneration, or we will not be in a good relationship. There's various extremes, right? There's also people who, maybe the opposite end of the spectrum. They're like, they almost have kind of they're sort of used to being abused, and so they actually go into relationships with the expectation that they'll be treated poorly, because that's how relationships usually work for them. Um, so it's just interesting, I think healthy relationships typically, well, healthy relationships are also a negotiation too, if you will. Um, I think that, kind of the best case scenario, I think, is that, two healthy people, kind of, not, this doesn't happen explicitly necessarily, right? This is like all kind of implied, basically. But two healthy people, they, whether we're talking romantic relationship, or even with just like friends, this can even be like mentor mentee. Um, but there's sort of a discovery process of like, who are you? Do I want to? Would we benefit from being in each other's lives? Can I give you something that you need and want, and vice versa? Can you also provide some of the things that I'm looking for as well? And so, if that can be in place, and then the relationship can move forward, and it can be a good and healthy thing. And I think some of the challenge sometimes is knowing like what's healthy and what's not, and what is the, if the relationship is having a problem, to to what extent do I attempt to kind of bridge that gap, and to what extent do I require the other person to bridge the gap for the relationship to move forward. And what can be confusing, right? Sometimes the parties can be gaslighting each other, or engaging in unhealthy behaviors that make it hard actually to, in the moment, to know, to really get a good sense of what's going on, what the right mature response is. So anyway, that is part of the challenge that is relationships. But in your negotiations, try to be fair, try to be humble, and do the right thing for yourself and for the other person.